It's now 6 months since protesters took to the streets of Iran, demanding a fair outcome to the elections, trying to incur the downfall of President Ahmadinejad. One of the defeated presidential candidates, Mehdi Karroubi, was more outspoken than most. He was threatened with jail after claiming the election was rigged and that opposition supporters had been physically abused. Tonight, in an exclusive interview, he's invited the BBC into his home and spoken frankly about his predictions for the country. Here's our Tehran correspondent, Line.
6 months on, and the Iranian government and opposition are squaring up for a new confrontation. New demonstrations, the possible arrest of opposition leaders like this man, Mehdi Karroubi. It could be an explosive mix. Mr. Karroubi has been one of the most outspoken of all the opposition leaders. He invited the BBC into his home in North Tehran. The government has shut down his office. It's one of the few interviews given by any senior opposition figure in Iran since immediately after the election.
We have lots of new restrictions. We used to have a newspaper that spread our opinions. We used to have party meetings. They've all been shut down. We can't even get permission for any social gatherings.
Hearing about those restrictions, it's remarkable, really, that Mr. Karroubi agreed to speak to us at all, especially bearing in mind the way the Iranian government, the BBC, for much of the post-election unrest. It's really quite an act of defiance. But Mr. Karroubi is enough of a veteran to remember how Ayatollah Khomeini used the media during his exile in Paris 3 decades ago.
A lot of Western media were writing about Ayatollah Khomeini. In Europe, his opinions were being carried by the media. BBC Radio reflected his views. How is it that was okay? When the BBC reflected his views, it was all right then.
The last time I met Mehdi Karroubi was 3 days after the election in June. His aides were pleading with him not to go down to an opposition rally for fear he'd be killed. But instead, we found millions of Iranians gathered in central Tehran. You can't even estimate the size of this crowd. It's all the way as far as I can see that way, and it's the same the other way, the other side of this bridge. It's an incredible crowd, and this is for a demonstration the government said was banned, and there would be serious consequences for anybody attending. People here just seem to have no fear whatsoever.
At the beginning of the movement, it was just a protest against the election. We didn't recognize it as a serious election. The government's response, the crackdown, has not calmed things down at all. In fact, it's just made the chanting louder. It's just increased the people's demands.
And it's not just what's been seen on the streets. Mehdi Karroubi has been pressing allegations that opposition detainees, both male and female, have been repeatedly raped by their prison interrogators. The government has vehemently denied his accusations and threatened to prosecute Mr. Karroubi. So does he still stand by them?
When the judiciary comes and shuts down my office, takes away my documents and threatens those who have come forward with allegations, so much so that some have had to leave the country, then I have to tell you, I still believe that the people who have spoken to me are telling the truth.
President Ahmadinejad, of course, insists it's all a Western plot after his triumphant re-election. So has he consolidated power, or is his government still in danger of collapse?
From the first day the election result came out, I was convinced that Mr. Ahmadinejad would not survive the full 4 years of his term. Even within the last 6 months, the government has only been kept in power by force. His government has disputes with MPs, with the rest of the world. There are economic, cultural and political problems. The government is facing trouble on all sides.
اگر چنانچه این پیام نرسیده بود 9 تا 8 تا وزیر میافتاد.
In recent days, this picture, apparently showing the desecration of a photo of Ayatollah Khomeini, has been repeatedly shown on Iranian state TV. The opposition says it's a fraud. But it is true that in recent protests, demonstrators have been sounding increasingly radical, and they could become even more so if their leaders are arrested, as the government keeps hinting it might. Mr. Karroubi views the prospect philosophically.
من میگم هیچ کس خوشایندش نیست زندان بره. دوست داشته باشه.
Nobody enjoys the idea of being sent to prison, especially by a regime I helped to create. It would be ironic if my wife and children would have to come and protest outside the prison on my behalf. They used to do that under the Shah's regime. If it happens, so be it. I'm ready. I don't think it will. But then whatever you assume, sometimes the opposite happens.
چون خیلی چیزا آدم حدس میزنه ولی عکسش میشه.
In fact, the situation in Iran is so unstable at the moment, you'd be a fool to predict what might happen next.
Mehdi Karroubi talking to John Line.